Hello Year 10, welcome to the next group of lessons that's going to be tackling the next booklet that you're looking at. So hopefully you have got the version of the new booklet, which is called Hitler's Consolidation of Power. Consolidation means strengthening. He's building up his power. Now that he's leader, how is he going to make sure he stays that way? So this one's not too long a topic. There are only going to be two lessons that we're going to do on it. So either you've had it emailed to you, I've done it in Word, so what you should be able to do is download it fine, and then what I would do is, if it's not letting you type things in, insert a text box in the space provided so that you can do that. So hopefully that's okay. Please email me if you're having any issues with that. Or if you've got IT issues, then it's been posted to you and I've printed it off. So as usual, there are a group of questions about the topic that we're going to come back and answer at the end. So turn to the first page for me, please. This lesson is going to be all about the Reichstag fire and something called the Enabling Act, which was a law passed after the Reichstag was set on fire. So let's have a little bit of context first. So the first thing that you'll see is a table that says what were Hitler's problems in 1933. So I would like you please to pause this video. The first part of the table you should be able to do. How has Hitler gained power since 1919? So the last book that we looked at was when Hitler joined the Nazi Party in 1919. It's now 1933. So what were the things that Hitler did in order to gain power? So I've started you off. I've said they published their own newspaper and put forward the party's views. That's the really boring, hard one. Give me a bullet point list of all the things that Hitler's done since joining the Nazi Party. That means he's now the Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Have a little pause so that you can, and then I'll go through the answers with you in a moment. Okay, so before we go through the answers, go to the next part of the table. Now that he's Chancellor and it's 1933, what problems do you think Hitler's got? I've done the first one for you. President, that's the only person that's more powerful than the Chancellor. He doesn't like Hitler. Hindenburg doesn't like Hitler. He's only chosen Hitler to be Chancellor because he made that deal, do you remember, with the ex-Chancellor von Papen, who the President likes. And von Papen says, don't worry, make him Chancellor, I'll be Vice-Chancellor, and I'll be able to control him. So again, do a couple of bullet points. What are the things that Hitler's possibly worried about or thinks is an issue now that he is finally Chancellor in 1933? Pause the video and then I'll go through the answers to both sides of the table. Okay, hopefully you've got a couple of things going on there. I doubt you'll get anything wrong, but if you get anything wrong, cross it out and obviously add things that you didn't manage to get first time around from this slide. So in terms of how he's gained power, he made speeches, anything to do with propaganda, I'll count posters and stuff. He used violence to get what he wanted. That's where the SA come in. He had his own army. The Munich Putsch, he tried to gain power by overthrowing the government using violence. Now it failed, didn't it? But that made him famous. It made him change his tactics so that he was more about getting elected. So this is where propaganda comes in. This isn't something that we talk about much, but you might want to get it down. He did get money a lot from what we would call industrialists. That's a word that we used a lot with medicine, didn't we? Industrialists are like factory owners, businessmen, so they've thrown their support behind him. And political scheming. So remember he did that deal with von Papen. He formed a coalition with various other parties in order to try and gain seats in the Reichstag. So those are all the things that he's done. What are his problems? So we've said the president doesn't like him. The Communist Party were the second most popular party in Germany, so they're a big problem for Hitler. They're his main rivals. He probably wants to kind of get rid of them, and he hates communists, doesn't he? So he won't like that. They didn't have the majority in the Reichstag, so even though there were multiple elections and they are the most popular party, they still don't have enough seats in the Reichstag in order to pass laws easily. In fact, there's only 2 Nazis that sit in the Reichstag, not including Hitler. Von Papen, the guy that he made that deal with, who's his vice-chancellor, thinks that he can control Hitler. And there are lots of violent protests and demonstrations going on. So those are the things that Hitler has to deal with. Okay, so that's a little bit of context. The power bit is kind of us saying how Hitler gets what he wants, and then the other side are the things that maybe Hitler has to deal with and would want to deal with that would be on his main hit list now that he's Chancellor. So I would say one of his main problems is the fact that he doesn't have a majority in the Reichstag, and the communists could take that from him and could, if he got rid of the Communist Party, that would be a big threat, and then there'd be seats free in the Reichstag that he could maybe fill with Nazi Party members. So I think that's probably high up on his hit list of things he needs to solve in order to get more power. So this is where we have the Reichstag fire. Have a look at the 3 questions at the bottom of the sheet, and then we'll move on to the 3 big boxes that you can see on the slide that I've got up here. Sorry about the emails. Okay, so questions are: what was the Reichstag building? What happened at the Reichstag building, and why was it an important place? So, what was the Reichstag building, year 10? When I say Reichstag, what do I mean? I'm hoping that in your heads you're saying, well, that's the government, that's like their version of Parliament. So write that down. You could say it's the government building. It's where the government met, or it's their version of Parliament. It's their version of, Big Ben. What happened at the Reichstag then? That's the headquarters of the government. What type of things would happen there? I'm hoping that you're using the word laws. Laws were passed there. People voted for laws and decided how the country would be run. Why is this an important place? Well, it's the place where all the big decisions about how to run the country are made. It's also an important place because it was fair and democratic. So all the people in the Reichstag were voted there by the people, obviously apart from the Chancellor. And if any time they wanted to pass a law or make a decision, they would all have to vote on it. So it's very democratic and fair. So just make sure you've answered those 3 questions before you turn to the sheet that says Reichstag fire 27th of February 1933. So if you're ready to go on to that bit, turn that landscape now so that you can see those 3 boxes like they are on the slide there. Now, you can use the knowledge organiser, the Germany knowledge organiser that you've all got. That is also uploaded onto the SharePoint. It will be uploaded either in the documents section, or the knowledge organiser section, or just the Germany section. Just have to scroll for it, and it will be labelled as Germany in Transition Knowledge Organiser. Or you could just listen to me speak for a little bit. It depends. Do you like the sound of my voice? Are you glad that you don't have to hear the sound of my voice 2-3 times a week? And therefore you might want to use the knowledge organiser. For those of you that maybe struggle to process information, you might be better off listening to me talk you through it. It's completely up to you. So I would either pause this video, read through your knowledge organiser, and then come back to the video to check that you got everything right, or I would listen to Miss Delamere tell you about the Reichstag fire and then pause it. You can fill in as you go, or you can pause it and fill in and then again check your answers. So I've split this sheet into 3 sections. So we're going to say what happened before the Reichstag fire, what were the events of the Reichstag fire, and what happened after the fire. So what were the events that led up to the fire? If you read the knowledge organiser, it talks a lot about another election. So Hitler's been made Chancellor in 1933. I would put that as my first bullet point, the events leading up to the fire. Hitler is Chancellor 1933. Now, we've already discussed one of the issues he had was that he didn't have the majority of the seats in the Reichstag. So what he does is he asks President Hindenburg to dissolve the Reichstag. When you dissolve something, think about a tablet dissolving in water. When you have one of those painkillers, it fades away, doesn't it? So what happens when you dissolve a government is you shut it down slowly. Okay. So he essentially says to the president, shut down Parliament temporarily for me, because you're the only one that's got the power to do that. And then we're going to hold an election in March. And this is January, I think he's kind of mentioning this. We're going to hold an election in March 1933, and hopefully I'll win that election. I'll win lots of seats in the Reichstag, and that way I've got the majority and you can reopen the Reichstag. Now, for some reason, Hindenburg agrees to this. So, while they're campaigning for this election, the Nazis do the usual. put out propaganda posters and speeches and things like that. Who do you think Hitler targets? Who is his biggest threat in the election, and therefore the people that he needs to really kind of like talk down to in put people off voting for? Hoping that you're saying the communists. So what he does is he does very anti-communist propaganda in the lead up to it. The other thing that he does is he gets the SA to go out into the streets and literally start fights with the communists. Number one, maybe they'll, be scared and stop trying to campaign against Hitler. And number two, he always spins it so that it was the communists that started the fight and the SA were just there to try and keep the peace. And yeah, it was brutal, and yes, we maybe killed some people, or some people were severely hurt or whatever, but we had to because they were so dangerous. So he kind of spins it like that. So I'd be getting those things down. I kind of did it as 4 bullet points. I put Hitler is Chancellor. I put he doesn't have the majority, so he gets Hindenburg to dissolve Parliament and say that there's going to be an election. I then said that they target the communists in the campaign, so they do very anti-communist propaganda. And then I'll finish by saying that the SA were involved as well, and they would like beat the communists up in the street and start fights with them and things like that. Okay, I'm going to move on to the events. If you're still writing that down, just pause the video for a second. So for events, I've essentially broken it down into 3 questions. What was the Reichstag? Why was it set on fire? Who did they arrest? So your first bullet point could be the Reichstag was, and we answered that question just before, didn't we? It was the government building, it was the place where the government met, whatever you want to say that. And then you can say, and it was set on fire. You've got the date above on the sheet. If you wanted to have the date, you could. 27th of February. So, about a week or 2 before the elections, it was set on fire. Why do you think it was set on fire? Why would you set a government building on fire? Yeah, hopefully. I love how I'm having a conversation with you guys and imagining that you guys are answering my questions. Hopefully you're thinking, because you don't like the government and you want to kind of protest against the government, or you want to shut the government down, or you want to stop the government from doing something. You could be anti-government, anti-Weimar, or you could be anti-Hitler. It's unclear, so any of those would work. You can just say anti-government. Okay, so who did they arrest? So they arrested a young Dutch communist. And the name of this communist was Marinus van, V-A-N, separate word, de, D-E-R, Lube, L-U-B-B-E, Marinus van der Lube. Good name to remember. So he's arrested for the fire. What is interesting about him? Not his name. That he's a communist, hopefully, is what you're saying. He was put on trial, and he even admits to starting the fire later. Not straight away, but he does later. And he says he started the fire because he was protesting the government. So I put that down. I put 27th of February, government building is set on fire. A young Dutch communist named Marinus van der Lube is arrested. He's put on trial, and he admits that he started the fire because he was protesting the government. So pause the video if you need to have time to write that in the middle box. And then what's the consequences of this? So, imagine that somebody set Parliament on fire in London. What would be the consequences of that? What would happen as a result? You're targeting, the government essentially, and you're saying that, that you hate the government so much that you would be willing to not just destroy the building where they met, but potentially, kill the people inside. So, first bullet point. What were the consequences of the fire? Hitler uses the fire to state that the government was being attacked. And they're not just being attacked by anybody. Who's been arrested? A communist. So he says the government are being attacked by a communist revolution. Now, by using the words communist revolution, everybody is going to think back to World War I, where the first communist revolution happened in Russia, where they murdered the royal family. Do you remember how they dragged them out of the palace and shot them to death in the woods? So everybody's going to be panicking and thinking, gosh, we don't want that to happen in Germany. So if you cause panic like that, if you say our government is under attack, there's going to be a communist revolution, and you make people afraid and panic, then they're going to let you do things that maybe you wouldn't have been allowed to do if everything was okay and calm. So what Hitler does is he persuades President Hindenburg to enact Article 48. Do you remember how that was the kind of wrinkle in the Constitution, that if there was a state of emergency, the president could take full power? So he says, this is a state of emergency, the government are under attack. Enact Article 48 and use that power to give me, Hitler, total control of the government. At this point, President Hindenburg isn't very well. He's actually dying of lung cancer. He's not even living in Berlin. He's kind of living in his country house. The doctors are telling him, you know, if you want to live, or if you want to live a few more months, you've got to essentially be in bed at home. So he does this. He gives Hitler complete power by passing something called the Enabling Act. Hitler uses this power to do things like arrest all communists that he feels are a threat. He bans all other political parties from meeting because he's afraid that all of them are going to start a revolution. And essentially, he ends up being the only person with power in the government. So what are the consequences? We need to put down Hitler uses the fire to say that the government is being attacked by a communist revolution. 2, he then uses that to persuade Hindenburg to pass Article 48 and use that power to give Hitler power. And 3, Hitler uses that power to do things like arrest communists, ban all other political parties, and essentially become the most powerful person in the government. So this is a bit of a lesson to us. Do not let fear and panic let people in power get away with doing things that you don't agree with. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next page now. So again, pause if you need to catch up. Otherwise, we're going to move on together. So turn to the next page. We're going to do a quick exam question, which is going to be, well, we're going to do the neighbourhood in a minute. Here's the exam question. Okay. So we've done this one before. This is going to be question 1 from the Germany paper. You know, you get given a source and you have to use the source, but then also your own knowledge to describe something in particular. So we always highlight the focus of the question. What does this question want you to describe? Reichstag fire. So highlight Reichstag fire for me. Now remember, the magic number is 2, and it's pretty clear by the wording of this question what your 2 paragraphs are going to be about. Use the source, that's 1 paragraph, and your own knowledge, that's your 2nd paragraph, to describe the Reichstag fire. I don't mind which order you do it in. You can do the source first or your own knowledge first. So in this, we've got a photograph of the Reichstag building on fire, 27th February 1933. What 2 things could you pick out that tell us about the Reichstag fire? This is almost so easy that it's difficult to pick things out, but I would be picking out things like the building is on fire. And from the attribution, I might pick out the date that it happened. So my source paragraph would be, in the source, it states that the Reichstag building was set on fire 27th of February 1933. This shows us that the Reichstag building was set on fire. What's important about 1933? Most important date that you need to remember for Germany is it's when Hitler became Chancellor. So you could say this shows us that the building was set on fire just after Hitler became Chancellor. And then if you're picking on the building being on fire, you could say, in the source, I can see that the Reichstag building is on fire. This shows us that. Remember why we said, what was the Reichstag and why would somebody set it on fire? Then for your own knowledge, fill in all the blanks. So it doesn't show us who was arrested and why and what Hitler did after. So that could be your own knowledge paragraph. Okay, so that should only take you like 5-10 minutes. You don't have to waffle because this is only question 1 and it's a 5-mark question, so it's like a warm-up question, so you shouldn't be taking too long to write it. Also, there's not that much we can write about the Reichstag fire, can we really? So pick those 2 things out of the source, get that done nice and quick, and then a couple of things from your own knowledge. Move on, please. Oh, and then take a picture of that and send it to me so I can tell you what you got out of 5. Okay, I'm going to move on to the last task. So pause this and complete the question and then play the next slide. Okay, so the title of this lesson was the Enabling Act. So we're just going to fill in this mind map at the bottom, at the back of the booklet. You can use Knowledge Organiser again if you'd like to, or you can listen to me speak again, whichever way you prefer to learn, and then use what I'm saying to check your answers in the booklet. Okay, so the Enabling Act was passed in 1933. It was essentially one of the things that President Hindenburg did with Article 48 because he had all this power. He said, like, we should try and get Hitler the power that he wants, because I'm obviously not very well, so I need to be able to give power to the Chancellor so he can do a few more things. But Hitler was kind of pushing for this anyway, and he was kind of making dodgy deals behind people's backs to get people to support it, because when initially it was put out there that we're going to pass this act that's going to give Hitler all the power, a lot of people were like grumbling, like, what? We don't want to give this guy all the power. So we had to do lots of dodgy deals in order to do it, and obviously the communists don't want this act to be passed because they know that as soon as Hitler gets the power, what's the first thing he's probably going to do is kind of try and get rid of the Communist Party, so they were very anti it. But it's the Reichstag fire that kind of pushes the Enabling Act, because that's when people are like, well, wow, actually, the building, the government building was under attack. This is a big deal. Maybe we do need to give the power to somebody that knows what they're doing. So the Enabling Act was passed in 1933. On the far side, I want you to list some of the rules of the Enabling Act. So they're listed on the Knowledge Organiser, but I'll tell you them now. So one of the laws of the Enabling Act was that all activities would be run by and controlled by the government from now on. Now, activities is a really vague statement, but it essentially means everything. So everything going on in the country had to be run by the government or were controlled by the government, and that means the Nazi Party, because they're the ones in charge. 2, all newspapers had to be censored by the government. So the government controlled what went into newspapers, and some newspapers were completely banned. So all communist and socialist newspapers were banned. 3, all other political parties were banned. No other political party was allowed to run for election. So essentially, you've got a dictatorship there, because only the Nazi Party are in power. No votes, nothing like that, no choice. That's the end of democracy in Germany. Trade unions are banned. Do you know what a trade union is? A union is a group of people that represents, so you can have a teachers union, for example. I'm a member of a teachers union. That means there's a group of people out there that look after the rights of teachers. So let's say that I thought Mr. Thorley was being really unfair and making me do work that I wasn't being paid to do, and I had asked him loads and he'd said, just do the work. I could then go to my union and say, look, I don't think my rights are being treated very fairly. I'm doing more work than I'm being paid for. They could then sort that out for me. They're the ones that organise strikes and things like that. And you can have lots of, you can have nurses unions, teachers unions and things like that. So trade unions are all workers' unions are banned, which means that you can't protest against your employer, you can't go on strike. So essentially, workers have no rights anymore. They've got to do what they're told. And any Jew that works in the civil servant, which means any Jew that works in the government, were sacked from their jobs. So they didn't want Jews working in the government. Okay. So get those down, and again, pause the video if you need to. So these are quite crazy. Everything's run by the government, all political parties are banned, newspapers are controlled, so the information that goes into newspapers is being controlled. People in workers don't have any rights anymore. I mean, how do you get away with passing all that? Like I said, lots of people were anti the Enabling Act. So at the top it says, how did Hitler manage to get the act passed? Well, one of the things he does is he bans communists from voting. Now, he's allowed to do that because a communist has been arrested for the Reichstag fire. So people kind of like, yeah, the communists are going to revolt, so that's fine. They're not allowed to vote. They would have been the ones that definitely voted no. So that's a huge kind of block out the way. If anybody in the Enabling Act voted for the Communist Party, he basically didn't count that vote. Anyone who refused to vote, so if you said, oh, I'm going to abstain from voting as like a protest, I'm just going to not turn up, Hitler used your name and voted for you, and guess what, voted for the Enabling Act. So if you were like, Emily Delamere is an absentee, she decided not to vote, he would just put, okay, well, Emily Delamere voted for the act. That's pretty sneaky. And the SA surrounded the voting chamber to kind of intimidate people into voting for Hitler's side. How did the Act give Hitler more power? So have a look at what the Act involved. How is it going to give him power? Pause it and see if you can come up with the ideas yourself, and then check the answers with me. So if he's banning all other political parties, it gives him power because his party is the only one in charge of the government. Who's he got rid of that was a threat to him? Communists. So he's got rid of the communist threat. If you censor all press, what does that mean? Essentially, you're controlling what information people in your country are reading. So they control what people are thinking and believing. If you control the press, you basically control the people. So there we go. So this law was a massive part of German history because it's the moment where democracy dies and essentially Germany becomes a dictatorship. It's finalised in 1934 when President Hindenburg dies of lung cancer. And what would happen is the president has died, so they should replace the president. Presidents are elected. So what should have happened is there should have been an election where people voted for the new president. Because the Enabling Act had been passed by then, Hitler said, we're not going to have presidents anymore, and we're certainly not going to have an election. I'm now the person in total control of Germany. We're not going to have chancellors. We're not going to have presidents. Instead, it'll be me, and I'm going to call myself Führer, which means leader. And that is where it is definitely a dictatorship, because there is only one person in charge. They're not voted for. They have all the power. They can do what they want. So Germany from 1934 is 100% a dictatorship. So there you go. That's the end of that lesson. Next week we'll look at the Night of the Long Knives, and we'll look at doing source analysis as the assessment at the end. Okay. So that means that next week this booklet will also be finished. So that's the aim. Okay. Make sure you're keeping this booklet somewhere safe. Make sure that you're taking pictures and emailing me those pictures so that I've got proof that you are doing the work. If you email me a picture of your exam question on the Reichstag fire, then I can tell you what you would get out of 5. Thank you very much for listening, Year 10.